So I flew in last night. I was heading here last night from New York. I actually live in California. But I was in the taxi, and the taxi driver said, okay, well, you look very cheerful. Where are you headed? I said, oh, boy, I'm going to a conference, I said. He said, okay, it's in Vegas, right? Yeah, okay. You look so happy. I said, no, it's not in Las Vegas. It's actually in Costa Mesa. And he said, it must be a really hot conference. I mean, anybody looking that happy? And I said, well, actually, no. I'm actually going to be speaking to 800 people who've lost children. And he looked at me like, my gosh, are you out of your mind? And I said, and I'm so grateful to be able to be with these people who are extraordinary. There's a little club in the world. It's a little bitty club. Oh, it's too big. But it's people who have lost the people they love more than anybody in the world. And they keep going. They live on. Somehow they live on. And I'm going to get to share how I lived on, because it happened to me a while ago. And my life is extraordinary now. And it's at a place where I never in a million years would have believed that I would ever be. So today I'm here to share what it is to live on with fire, with passion, and most of all with purpose. I'm going to take you on a journey. And I lived in Kenya for a long time in my life. And a journey in Kenya, and I know some of our people here spend some time in Kenya. A journey in Kenya is a safari. That's all a safari means. But we all know that safaris can be tricky things. You know, your vehicle can break down and the clouds are too cloudy to guide yourself and you lost your compass, and it can be really challenging. My safari has been quite a challenge, certainly, but I'm going to share a little bit of it today. And I'm actually from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Anybody Iowa, any here? Oh my gosh, look at the Iowa contingent. I love you. Yes, okay. I feel accompanied now. I can do anything. Feel the fear and do it anyway is what we were talking about earlier today. So I grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and those cornfields are high, right? The corn is high. I always knew that there was something more I was meant to do outside of the cornfields. I married an Englishman, moved to Africa when my children were very young. Dan and Amy were just little kids. They were 3 and 7 when we moved there. And because it was Kenya, and you didn't have to have a PhD or a degree or anything much to be able to get out and do stuff, I became a journalist. And I wrote for the Nation newspaper, and I got to write stories about the most incredible people. They were artists and photographers and filmmakers. They were leaders of social movements. They were out there transforming the world around them. They did not ask permission. They did not get licenses. They did not necessarily know what they were doing, but they got on and did it. And I was so inspired by these creative, noisy, active spirits. They're amazing. My son Dan followed in my footsteps. He was a kid, and he had a camera, and he often took pictures for me for the newspaper. When he was about 16, it was almost like a light went off in his head. And he said, Mom, you know, I've watched all these people, and there are some issues around me that I'd really like to see if I can impact in a positive way. And he had a little friend who was a scholarship student at his school. She lived in the worst slum in Kenya, and you know it's called Kibera. She lived in a mud hut with her father, who was a baker, and she had a heart condition. And she was going to die within the year if something wasn't done. And Dan said, we have to do something. So Dan started an organization called Save a Heart, and he raised fundraisers. Okay, they were wild parties in our backyard. Okay, that was one of the wild parties. And that's Dan showing the wild party in one of his journals. They raised enough money for this little girl. She had a heart operation. It was amazing, and he kind of got high on the possibility of doing stuff. So whenever anything needed to be done, he figured out a way to try to help. When he was a little bit older, he met a Maasai family living in the bush. And the mama had 7 kids. She had a useless husband. And so Dan said, right, I'm going to help. And so he went out and would go every weekend. He'd get in one of these very dangerous buses, travel out to Maasai land, and he would buy jewelry, handmade bracelets and earrings from this wonderful woman, beaded jewelry, and bring it back, and everybody was decorated in Maasai jewelry. I mean, everybody who came in Dan's path ended up with jewelry everywhere, you know? I mean, Coke bottle earrings. That was another really successful venture, and actually when he was about 19, he had another idea. This time, he had heard about a refugee camp in Malawi, which people were suffering terribly. They had 14,000 people in the refugee camp. They didn't even have a well. So he thought, okay, let's figure this one out. He was 19 years old. He was at college in California. So he said, of course, let's start student transport aid. And we're going to transport students across Africa and bring them aid. Well, you know, I knew that nobody, no parent in their right mind would ever allow their children to travel with my son, 19 years old, across war-torn Africa to deliver aid, right? Guess what? They did. And Dan ended up traveling with 15 kids across Africa to deliver aid to a refugee camp. They built 2 wells. They profoundly impacted the lives of these incredible people, and most of all, they profoundly affected their lives. And I might just point out, I was just in New York with the girl in the middle, top middle. Ellie Tatum is the editor of the Amsterdam News now. The guy next to her is Chris Nolan. Now, Chris Nolan we know about because he's the director of Batman and Inception. And he was the student filmmaker on the safari. So out of that extraordinary experience has come so much amazing talent in this sense that, oh, okay, you know, there's a problem, we'll go out and fix it. That experience was to change Dan's life profoundly, and he went in and out of colleges, and kind of, I was always like, when are you going to get your degree? But his mom, there are other ways to learn. You know, you can take a year on. Forget about the year off. It's a year on that we really need to do. That's how we really learn, is tackling experiences firsthand. So Dan was supposed to be heading back to college. He was 21 years old, and he learned about a famine in southern Somalia, which is just the country above Kenya. And he and a friend, a young friend from Reuters, decided to go up and see if they could figure out what was happening there. Dan took his camera, the other guy, and traveled with the other guy, who actually was a proper journalist, and they discovered there was a horrific famine in Mogadishu. And Dan started shooting pictures that broke his heart. He'd never seen anything like this. And his photographs were among the first to alert the world to this terrible, terrible famine. This was 1993. His pictures triggered Operation Restore Hope. The Marines came in and brought aid, and things were just wonderful for a short time. Unfortunately, they didn't disarm the people, so the situation grew from dire to horrific. Dan stayed on, and I was very worried. In July of 1993, it was the end of June, and this picture appeared in the center spread of Newsweek and Time magazine and all over the world. I was in London when I saw it, and I finally managed to track him down, and I said, Dan, don't you think it's time to go? And I could hear, you know, the phone, and I hadn't seen him in a while, and he said, Mom, please, don't ask me to leave. The story isn't over. There's more that I have to tell. Please don't ask me to leave. And I thought about it, you know, and we've all been in these situations, and I thought, okay, what do I say? Because he's not, you know, I'm not going to be able to sway him. And I said, okay, Dan, okay, you're living the life of your choice, and I'm proud of you. I'm so proud of you. And I said, I love you so much, Mom. And he said, I'm going to send you a ticket to Nairobi. And I said, no, Dan, I'm sending you a ticket to London. And please. And we hung up, and I was booking you know, I knew I would see him in 2 weeks' time. But 2 weeks later, there was a terrible bombing by UN forces of House, where they believed that the warlord who was responsible for all evil, it's sort of like our quest for Osama bin Laden, they believed this warlord was hiding, and the troops, Marines, bombed a house. And unfortunately, tragically, the warlord wasn't there. And instead, there were 200 people, the imam, the old sort of like the priest, the 90-year-old. There were children, there were women, there were people who were trying to create a future pathway to peace. 52 of those people were killed and 200 were wounded. When the survivors ran to the journalists' hotel, where the journalists were all watching this horrible sort of bombing, and they begged the journalists to come, and they said, we will protect you, don't worry, we'll protect you. And after quite a lot of thought, a little group of journalists bundled into a convoy and set off to the house. And when they got there, they started shooting. And the kind of veteran journalist there, photojournalist, said it was the worst carnage he had ever seen. And they were loading bodies into wheelbarrows and taking them off. And Dan started shooting, but they were very quickly surrounded by angry people, angry Somalis whose husbands and wives and children had been killed by this bombing. And they started screaming at the journalists. They picked up stones, they picked up knives, they picked up sticks, and they started beating and stoning and shooting the journalists. 4 journalists were killed that day. My son was beaten and stoned to death by a mob, and he was at that point 22 years old. I don't have to tell any of you what it is to be in anguish, to literally know your life is over, to go to sleep that night and know you'll never be happy again, and wake up in the morning and there's that tiny little minute that's like a 15-second gap before you remember what happened. I know we all remember that, and some of us all too recently. I know I don't have to tell you what it's like to crash a car. How many people have crashed or bumped their car because they weren't thinking? Anybody out here join me? Yeah, 1 or 2 of us, right. I don't have to tell you what it's like to lose a relationship because you simply can't get through it together. It's really hard. I don't have to tell you what it is to try to be brave for the rest of the family, for your children. I had a daughter. I don't have to tell you any of these things. I went to my journal and tried to figure out how I was going to get through this, through my doodles, my drawings. And I don't have to tell you how other people in their well-meaning, and they do mean well, said, hey, don't worry, first year, go through the birthday, you go through anniversary, you got Christmas there, Thanksgiving, you do one circuit, and then Bob's your uncle, you're fine, you're going to get much better. How many people got better after 1 year? Anybody? Any hands up? Oh, golly, yeah, whole crew of you. No, it doesn't work like that. I'm sorry. So after 1 year, after 2 years actually, my daughter and I were really having trouble. And she had dropped out of college, and I'd moved to California because I really wanted to do something with this horror. I wanted to transform, but didn't have a clue how. And one day she said, Mom, this is it, I really can't go on, I'm so sorry. And that was like, she said it, but I probably would have said it to her. And I said, I looked around, I was in my bedroom, and I looked around and I spotted, there was a dream catcher on my wall. And I said, Amy, I know what we'll do. We'll create an angel catcher. She said, what's an angel catcher? And I said, well, it's a book where we can capture everything about Dan, what he liked and what he used to say and what his voice sounded like, because I was already starting to forget the sound of my son's voice. You know that. We can capture the quotes and pictures and all the things that will remind us of Dan. So Amy came back at Christmas time with her bulging book, and she said, here's my angel catcher. And I realized that it was something that if we did it right, maybe it could help other people. And we've submitted a proposal to Chronicle Books, and the editor had just lost her dad and burst into tears when she got it. And this book, Angel Catcher, has been the beginning of a writing career for my daughter and me. So out of that horror, something really good came, and we've gone on to write Angel Catcher for kids. We did Soul Catcher, and later we did Love Catcher. So, already there's something that was starting to percolate in our spirit, a creative response to something that was absolutely unbearable. We had, after the memorial service for Dan, I had gone to the head of Reuters, and I said, please, Mr. Mark Wood was his name, we have to transform this horror into something we can bear. And I got the support of AP and Reuters to help us try to give conferences about journalists at risk. And many of you, I know, out here, your child has died of something, an illness, multiple sclerosis, all sorts of things. And we join forces with other people who are trying to eradicate whatever it is or find the cure to cancer. In my case, it was all about journalists at risk and showing people the dangers that they faced. My daughter came home from college another day and she said, Mom, I think we should do a film about journalists at risk. We took the idea, I had never made a film, okay? No idea. We took the idea to Turner Broadcasting, and they said, right, we're going to give you the funding and the director to be able to do it. And Amy and I went back to Africa. We went back to the place where Dan had been killed, to Somalia, to visit that site with the only journalist who had survived. And when I got there, I was angry. I was so mad because I ran into Somalis. And I hadn't forgiven Somalis yet, and I'd done a lot of reading on what happens when you don't forgive, or at least when you don't find a space in your heart to move on from anger. But I was really angry. And I was particularly angry when we went to the house which had been bombed, and we were surrounded by all these women, and we had to run back to the vehicle because they were pounding on the doors of the van saying, you go away. You're reminding us of what happened. Please, just go away. They didn't say please. We almost were killed by these people. And I was still angry. We produced the film. It's called Dying to Tell the Story. It was so exciting. We were invited to premiere it at the United Nations. How crazy is that? It was such an honor. And Amy and I were all dressed up with the one survivor, Mohammed Shafi. And we went out to get in the taxi to go to the United Nations. And I crawled in the cab, and Amy crawled in behind me, and I looked in front of me. And can you imagine who was driving the cab? It was a Somali. I thought, oh my gosh, what do I do? You know, I'm not in love with Somalis right now. I thought, what do I do? So, of course, because it was the story, I had to tell. And I told this guy, you know, the back of his head, my story. And I told him how Dan had been killed, how he'd been beaten to death, stoned by that mob. And the guy, when we got to the United Nations, he turned around and his eyes were glistening. He said, my name is Mohammed. And he said, I know all about your son. I know exactly what happened. I lost my brother in that incident. He said, but I want to tell you, it was terrible what happened, and everybody knew it, and we all feel so badly. He said, please, please, on behalf of all Somalis, I ask your forgiveness. I didn't know. I mean, when I think about it now, I think, wow, how could that happen? How could that bit of synchronicity, that extraordinary situation happen to me? I said, yes. Oh, my goodness, yes, I said. Of course, I understand why they did what they did. They'd lost their brothers, they'd lost their sisters, they'd lost their parents, their children. I understand, and I absolutely forgive. And with those words, it's like the air, the life rushed back into me. And it prepared the way for everything that was to come. And sometimes forgiveness is beyond us, but empathy, compassion, all of those things probably will help heal us more quickly and more thoroughly than hanging on to the sense of rage, revenge, bitterness, certainly for me. Well, next was a discovery. We discovered 20 journals that Dan had been keeping, all those pictures and images, drawings and scribbles. We captured them and pulled them together in a book called The Journey is the Destination. I just discovered recently that the new infinity is called The Journey is the Destination. And I think Dan pretty much found that saying, and it's something that each one of us really need to reflect on. We know destinations, sometimes people don't get there. And what is that destination anyway? The next book we did was Safari as a Way of Life. And think about that too. It's once again, the journey as a way of life. It's exploring the known and unknown, distant and near, and seeing with eyes of a child, these are Dan's words, all traces of horror, utopia, or hell. We found so many little nuggets in this kid. It's almost as though his spirit, his soul, knew he wasn't going to be around for a very long time. With the books that came out, there was something more that I knew I had to do, and I wasn't sure what it was, but I reflected back on the people that I'd met in Kenya, the extraordinary, noisy spirits, those activists, those creative beings, and I decided it would be amazing to create a foundation to celebrate people like Dan and the incredible people I'd met along in my journey who had lost children, who had out of loss, extraordinary things had come. We started the Creative Visions Foundation, all about the power of vision, to look beyond what is obvious, what we see in front of us, to transform horrible things into something positive, to transform ideas into action and communicate them for the greatest impact. Right now, we started in 1998. We now have 63 projects and productions under our sponsorship. We have Rain Phoenix, whose brother River, as you remember, the young musician, died. We have DJ AM's family. DJ AM was one of the top young DJ artists. We have filmmakers and writers and photographers. We have all varieties of people. And what I want to do now is create a section for people who've gone through hell with the loss of something great in their lives, the loss of a child, a sibling, a husband, and to try and find a way to embrace you people, to bring you in and say, hey, you know what? There is more. You can live on, live through this tragedy. You can take the energy of grieving, which can destroy us, and you can put that energy and wrap it around something that can nurture and grow. It does not have to be a foundation, believe me. In fact, when we get kind of like overwhelmed by all this stuff, in one of Dan's journals, I found this wonderful quote that is attributed to Emerson, but it actually was written by a woman. And you'll know it, I'm sure. This is a definition of success: to laugh often and much, to appreciate beauty and find the best in others, to leave this world a little bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, a redeemed social condition, to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. That is to have succeeded. So whatever it is, like Goethe, whatever you can do or believe you can do, begin it now. Genius has boldness, magic, and power. Begin it now. And I think out of this extraordinary gathering of people, there's so much energy that can be focused and released that can bring so much good to the world, because you are such extraordinary, good people. Out of this foundation, we have created something that we are calling, we've got the Activist Toolkit. If you go online, creativevisions.org, we have a free downloadable toolkit which can help you take that idea that you have been nurturing and turn it into reality. Whatever it is, we took it to Harvard Social Entrepreneur Organization, and they said it's like Harvard Business School, first year in a little tiny booklet for high school kids. So get it, it's free. But out of that, how do you sustain an organization? Many of you who have organizations or are working on these things, how do you find the sustainability? We worked with a guy who said, we're going to make T-shirts. So we've created a T-shirt line. This is called the Dan Eldon Project. And again, it's the journey is the destination. We've had some interesting people, actually, in our T-shirts. Anybody recognize her? She's standing on the veranda of the Dan Eldon Center for Creative Activism. And if you'd told me all those years ago that we were going to have Julia Roberts standing on the Dan Eldon Center for Creative Activism, I would have told you you're out of your, I won't say tiny minds, but that's what I would say. So Julia's been a real ally with us. We invite you to come and see us. We're on the borders of Malibu and Santa Monica, and it's the most beautiful place on earth. We're creating a garden of forgiveness, a garden of love, understanding, transformation, and it would be very cool for me to have you come and see us. But there is more, and it is the On Revolution. We're rolling out the On Revolution because we feel right now the world is in a really challenging state. Governments are not going to be able to provide the total leadership for us. Foundations are doing their best. Corporations are trying, sort of. But really, it's going to be up to individuals to help guide that transformation that we so desperately require. And as far as I am concerned, I feel that I have on my shoulder a very noisy spirit saying to me, Mom, live on, live on, live on. Don't give up. Transform whatever it is. Go out there. Live with fire. Live with passion. Live with purpose. Don't give up. That's me on the beach, living on. And I say to you all what I said at the memorial service for Dan. We called it a celebration of life. It was on the Ngong Hills. We had Maasai warriors passing by. We had goats. We had cattle being herded back to their bomas. It was an incredible night. And I told people how in my worst times, at my lowest, before Dan was killed, we all go through hard times. This was after leaving Africa and a husband. And Dan gave me a beautiful tape, and it was a Cat Stevens. And it was the one, remember the song, "You're only dancing on this earth for a short time," remember? That you want it to last forever, you know it never will, you know it never will. And I said at this celebration, the saddest celebration I've ever been at, I'll tell you, I said, okay, we know Dan's dance has been very short indeed. You may only dance for a short time. But I believe that if Dan were here, he would say, you choose your dance. You dance it loudly, you dance it proudly, you dance it with incredible energy and creativity and joy, and most of all, you dance your dance with love. And I thank you all for inviting me here. Thank you.